In late April, WHO announced the emergence of a novel influenza A virus. This particular H1N1 strain has not circulated previously in humans. On the basis of available evidence and these expert assessments of the evidence, the scientific criteria for an influenza pandemic have been met.
For weeks, it seemed the number of people with swine flu was only slowly creeping up. But in the past 7 days, the rate of new cases has risen significantly. Now there are new predictions for the months ahead, and the figures are dramatic.
Cases are doubling every week, and on this trend, we could see over 100,000 cases per day by the end of August, though I stress this is only a projection.
Swine flu was first confirmed in the UK at the end of April, and the number of cases has steadily risen. Last week it hit 2,236. Today it stands at over 7,000. But this graph shows just how steep the increase could be over the weeks leading up to the end of August. The antiviral drug Tamiflu will continue to be given to patients, but hopes lie with a new vaccine. Enough doses have been ordered for the entire population.
Is it all about cash? This virus that is flooding through the world needs to be stopped. Step in, pharmaceutical companies.
Once again, as pharmaceutical companies are being accused of hyping up a false pandemic, the Council of Europe is putting the virus on its winter agenda, which is now underway. The COE's head of health also claims the World Health Organization colluded with major drug companies and changed the definition of pandemic. Dr. Wolfgang Wodarg says it ensured maximum profits but no risks for the firms. Now countries like Britain, France, and Germany have stockpiles of vaccines lying unused as infections spread far less than the panic surrounding it.
Moving on, there's growing global anger against the World Health Organization for reportedly making H1N1 pandemic bigger than it really was. A key accusation is that it was pushed to do so by big pharmaceutical companies who wanted to make big money by fueling fear. Here in India too, public health experts say this isn't the first time WHO has pushed for programs, even though they're not needed in the country.
The World Health Organization says the spread of the H1N1 virus has become a global pandemic and is now unstoppable. Scary stuff, but there's little evidence of it on the streets as life seemingly goes on as normal. Is the threat as serious as it sounds, or has it been exaggerated by the media and pharmaceutical companies? Are we ready?
If you've been diagnosed with probable or presumed 2009 H1N1 or swine flu in recent months, you may be surprised to know this. The odds are you didn't have H1N1 flu. In fact, you probably didn't have flu at all. That's according to state-by-state test results obtained in our 3-month-long CBS News investigation. In short, only a small fraction of cases that doctors flagged as most likely to be swine flu actually tested positive for swine flu at state labs. The vast majority of the cases were negative.
And now let's hear from Dr. Wolfgang Wodarg, who's in Strasbourg. Hello, Dr. Wodarg. What's your evidence that drug firms created a false alarm over swine flu?
The WHO has installed a private-public partnership with the pharmaceutical companies some 8 years ago. They started, and it seems that the pharmaceutical industry is has very successfully influenced the work, because they made a lot of profit with 2 false alarms of the WHO. First, it was the birds flu alarm, which never happened. Birds flu did not exist as a disease spread from one human being to the other. And the second now was the swine flu alarm, which was just a normal flu as we experience every year, even milder than most of the years. And nevertheless, they succeeded to make such a big marketing out of it, using scientifics who were at their hand and using our governments, impressing them that they made contracts with marketing commitments which cost us billions worldwide.
Okay, now you implicate the World Health Organization in this, but even though swine flu hasn't spread as much as it was touted, it still fits the definition of pandemic. Is the WHO so wrong in this stance?
Yes, the WHO had a definition of a pandemic, and a pandemic is something very special, which is big morbidity and a high mortality. And this was in the definition before in 2004, 2005. You can read it in the WHO websites and in the papers. And this year, they suddenly dropped those two characteristics. They said nothing about the severeness of the disease, which is spreading, and they said nothing about the mortality, which is very essential for such a definition. And as the WHO was at the trigger to give the alarm for all which was prepared before, the WHO is the institution which has the biggest responsibility in this case. I think we have to see that the WHO is transparently working, and that the interest between the public interest on one side and the economic interest are that they are separated. And we have to make recommendations. Our governments have to go to WHO and have to be in the World Health Assembly. They have to tell WHO how to work better and with higher quality in future.
Okay, one last question, Dr. Vadarg. What's the Council of Europe going to do to get answers from drugs firms on this?
We try to investigate how this happened, how this false alarm happened twice. And we try to investigate and to find out what structures we need that we can start to rely on our institutions. It's not only the WHO, it's also the national institutions. Many of us, in many states, there were national institutions that just followed what WHO said. And they continued even telling us that there may be a second wave, although some other institutions already had found out and had documented that, for instance, in Australia, where the winter is long over, there has been none, and there is no scientific evidence for a second wave, so they continue selling their drugs, and WHO helps them, and some national institutes do this too. And it is irresponsible, it's unresponsible, because people are vaccinated without and needlessly. And it makes a damage to people. There may be side effects, and it costs a lot of money. But I think the side effects and the giving children to vaccination, which is not necessary, when it's even not proved that the vaccinations of children help something, and the vaccines are not tested with children. So there's so many things happening, and WHO is just covering all this and saying this is a good thing. It's incredible what's happening.
Fueling fear. Here in India too, public health experts say this isn't the first time WHO has pushed for programs, even though they're not needed in the country.
French pharmaceutical expert Dr. Marc Girard believes that the H1N1 pandemic flu was far from being the worst pandemic in recent history. Many like him had warned last summer that the novel flu was not as virulent as the WHO was claiming, and that the swine flu vaccine was developed in a hurry and has serious side effects.
Ça fait peur sur un plan économique, mais ça fait peur sur un plan sanitaire, parce que la plupart de ces vaccins ont une toxicité qui est très importante. Et finalement, ce qu'on appelle l'OMS sont des sous-groupes d'experts qui sont des experts, des sous-groupes qui sont créés généralement par l'industrie pharmaceutique, financés par l'industrie pharmaceutique.
What we found was by the third week in July, the CDC advised states to stop testing for individual cases of H1N1 flu. And they stopped counting individual cases. The rationale that the CDC gave was, well, why continue wasting resources tracking when we already have established there is an epidemic? But there's some disagreement on the strategy as to whether or not these individual cases should be tracked. In the meantime, we contacted all 50 states directly. I just want to give you a couple of samples of what we found. In California, they took 13,000 specimens, and of those, 296 were swine flu, 12% were other flu, 86% were negative for flu altogether. And in Florida, they had 8,000 specimens, more than that actually. 17% proved to be, upon further testing, H1N1. 83% were negative. In Alaska, 1% was swine flu. And in Georgia, 2.4% was swine flu. The rest were negative for swine flu. We wanted to hear from CDC when we found that these figures, the high negative rate among those cases considered to be most likely to be swine flu. And they wouldn't answer freedom of information requests that we filed. They wouldn't answer questions that we posed to them. And we approached Dr. Frieden, who heads CDC, at an unrelated news conference to confront him about this lack of information.
I'm Jane Dutton. The spread of swine flu is unstoppable. That is now the latest warning from the World Health Organization, and comes after the WHO raised the pandemic alert from 5 to 6 just last month. Governments across the world have been stepping up precautions against its spread since the first confirmed case in Mexico in late April. About the same time, the US and Canada confirmed their first cases. Within a week, Spain said it had its first swine flu case in Europe. And Israel confirmed the first case in the Middle East. In less than a month's time, like wildfire, the virus spread across the world. The latest WHO report confirms nearly 90,000 cases in 125 countries, with 382 dead. The WHO says it's unstoppable, 382 people dead. Is it really unstoppable, Mr. Tantoi? Are these not just scare tactics that are totally unacceptable?
Well, I believe that the current situation, I would say yes, because the disease is being transmitted now from person to person, and the traveling of persons from place to place has covered the whole world now, and by definition, phase 6 means that there is sustained community transmission in more than one country.
A poll in New York City this week suggested that hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers have had H1N1, but only 0.1% needed hospitalization. So are these fear tactics really that necessary? Okay, Mr. Tantoi, let's get back to you now. I'm trying to reconcile this language that is being used by the WHO, this warning, not, as Ms. McKenzie said, the fear tactics, but rather warning, which should be heeded. How come this is not played out on the streets? Everywhere you go, you see that the masks have gone. Apparently something like 1.6 million people applied to go to Michael Jackson's funeral. So people are no longer as frightened as they used to be. Okay, let's just remind you how we got here and if the H1N1 flu virus is as scary as it sounds. Last month, the WHO raised the pandemic alert level from phase 5 to phase 6. Ms. McKenzie, why is this important, the official pandemic tag at phase 6 and the fact that it's now been called unstoppable?
Well, the thing is, there are sort of two questions in there. The first one is, why do we go to phase 6? Because that is the legal prerequisite that the drug companies need.
The drug companies need
to go ahead and make pandemic vaccine. Otherwise, they have contracts that they say they should be making vaccine for the regular seasonal flu.
So what happens now? Dr. Chan says the official declaration of the pandemic means drug manufacturers will speed up development of a vaccine.
As of today, nearly 30,000 confirmed cases have been reported from 74 countries. This is only part of the picture. With few exceptions, countries with large numbers of cases are those with good surveillance and testing procedures in place. I have therefore decided to raise the level of influenza pandemic alert from phase 5 to phase 6. The world is now at the start of the 2009 influenza pandemic. The virus raised the rules, and this one, like all influenza viruses, can change the rules without rhyme or reason at any time. We know that the novel H1N1 virus preferentially infects younger people. In nearly all areas with large and sustained outbreaks, the majority of cases have occurred in people under the age of 25 years. Each and every one of these deaths is tragic, and we have to brace ourselves to see more. This pattern is significantly different from that seen during epidemics of seasonal influenza, when most deaths occur in frail elderly people. WHO has been in close dialogue with influenza vaccine manufacturers, and that full capacity will be available to ensure the largest possible supply of pandemic vaccine in the months to come. WHO continues to recommend no restrictions on travel and no border closures. Influenza pandemics, whether moderate or severe, are remarkable events because of the almost universal susceptibility of the world's population to infection. We are all in this together.
We know that COVID-19 spreads fast, and we know that it's deadly, 10 times deadlier than the 2009 flu pandemic.
Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice,